I'd like to spend a couple minutes, if you don't mind. I put it in the chat to you. Like looking at this piece in the Atlantic, because I do think it actually highlights what Connor's role is and why this kind of thing is so dangerous. And just to set it up a little bit, you know, the CRT debate is really frustrating one to watch because it's one of those things where the terminology is all over the place. It's sometimes almost like ironic to, I mean, not ironic, that's wrong. It seems misplaced to see people actually spending time defending like CRT as like as a legal theory,
Yep.
right? As an intellectual theory, and historicizing it and contextualizing and all this stuff that you see a lot of people on the left doing, because this is not what the right wing is talking about. What the right wing is talking about is this fear that people are learning, about Thomas Jefferson's history, or the fact that Stonewall Jackson was a monster, right? Or the fact that the Southern idea of like the lost cause is BS, right? Those kind of mythologies, those kind of American mythologies are being challenged mainly um, in the public sphere, and more than anything. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. While I had some liberal teachers in high school, I learned all of the lost cause mythology as a part of my high school history education.
Mm.
And I'm 28, so maybe I'm a little too old to be able to talking about what's happening right now. But I gotta say that if they're worried about more and more generations being like lost to this kind of horrible right wing and white supremacist mythologizing, it's still very early days. But anyways, um, this piece just for me highlights why people like Connor are frustrating and frankly dangerous, is because what they try to do is they try to make the unreasonable seem reasonable. And it's a long piece, and I won't make Matt scroll through it or work too long. But if you go down a little bit, um, I just wanted to note some things where he 100%. So if you scroll on just a section further past this like list here, here we go. I sympathize with fears that some educators try to indoctrinate rather than educate public school students about race, and that some left progressive perspectives about race veer into racial essentialism, discrimination, or crude racial stereotypes. Any teacher actively promoting the concepts targeted by the North Carolina bill should meet public resistance. For lawmakers or parents to object to curricula that promote ideological dogma about race is neither illiberal nor authoritarian, any more than objecting to lost cause mythology in public schools is illiberal or authoritarian. So if you just scroll up real quick, and then I think that will be enough for me to be able to characterize his argument for folks. This list right here, the 1 through 7, is this House bill in North Carolina that he is promoting as a kind of solution, right? And essentially, what it says, is in the way that it's framed here, is put forward in a way that might seem to be very, very not offensive, right? You can't teach that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual, solely by virtue of his race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. So that outlaws D'Angelo, which is not necessarily the biggest tragedy, right? But like this argument right here is like it's very vague, and it's basically saying that you can't say one race is better than the other race. You can't say that certain races have inherent characteristics, and if you do that, that goes against the policy, right? And we can put this away for now. And the reason that this is so frustrating from Connor is because it's one of those examples where the right wing is becoming a little clever in the way that they sneak these things into legislation, right? Because when they put into legislation, we're not going to teach the truth about the Declaration of Independence, right? It becomes very, apparent to most reasonable people what's going on. But the reason that these legislation are written in this way is to make, again, the unreasonable sound reasonable. Along with this legislation are rules that if anybody wants to talk about certain subjects, they have to first apply 30 days in advance to get those approved by their school authorities, right? Which is a great way to chill any kind of classroom discussion if starting to talk about race or discrimination or any of these concepts could run you afoul of the law if you don't turn in your permission slip in time, right? So yeah, you can maybe point to these core tenets, and I think that there's a lot to wrestle with there that is also probably not the right thing to be mandating for schools. But for what I mean by that is like creating all these rules about what is and is not allowed to be in a classroom discussion like that. I think even if it's very, very broad, we should be worried about it. But it's also presenting it in this way that acts like it's just a complete abstraction, right? There's no other context around it, because the real context of this is a highly polarized political environment where you're having parents showing up to school board meetings freaking out about their kids being taught that white people are bad, right? Again, this is stuff that's pumped to them through Fox News, right? And it might be all lies, but this is the kind of thing that motivates and gets people to start showing up. So what you do is you pass legislation, and then that has a chilling effect on teachers because they're worried about this whole new legal web that's being spun around them that they could potentially run afoul of, right? That's why you create these kind of things, and that's how you punish people. And then you can bring up the Connors of the world and say, like, look, there actually is nothing really offensive that we're banning here. These are just common sense solutions. No, there was no problem in the first place, right? What you're doing is you're creating a problem, and you're arming nut jobs and people who have an agenda, right, with more tools to wage war against public school teachers. It's really absurd to me. And that's why I get so frustrated about like the reasonable side of the unreasonable. Well, what you don't get is that, oh yeah, the laws that they're trying to pass in Idaho are crazy, but North Carolina figured it out, and now liberals are the ones who are unreasonable about this.
Yeah. Do you want, let's also just a note on Connor Friedersdorf's reasonableness before we move on. Here's another reply in that same question. Again, question, how do you teach the race thing? Friend of the Talking Bird says, slavery was evil and its consequences are still felt today. Check. And then here's the one that they don't agree with. You were born in 2004 of parents who immigrated to the U.S. from Ukraine in 1989 and from Russia in 1993, but you are personally responsible for slavery, and that's X. And then Brandon has the nice rejoinder there. Personally responsible for? Nope. Benefit from slavery's legacy? Yep. You betcha. And Connor Friedersdorf said, that is not clear to me. So that's not clear that...
Can I just say something about that?
Yeah.
And benefit, and I don't want to just like step on something that's going to piss a lot of folks off, but if you live in the United States of America, just because of the fact that it has amassed so much wealth and power, right, that has its origins in slavery, right? Like, you don't even need to do the kind of like, pretzel stuff. It's like, well, my family came from Ukraine in the 60s. Well, they came to the United States, which is an empire built off of the exploitation of slave labor, the genocide of the Native Americans, and global imperialism, right? And again, you might like to say like, oh, now you have the sin of this on you, right? And like you need to go to a bunch of D'Angelo seminars, is of course absurd. But to act like there is no connection to America today and to those systems is absurd. And to act even of people who came in after, again, I disagree with the kind of liberal notion of these things, that the way that we deal with this history is just to have, like just public apology tours,
right,
and a lot of discourse. I think that what we need to be doing is massive redistributions of wealth and building working class power to take the power away from the systems, and most notably the families who benefited the most from these things, right? But yeah, it's just absurd to me to sit around and to act like you can't sit here in 2021 and see how these systems benefit people living in America today. I just find that to be ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, like as a North Dakotan, like first thing we hear about growing up about the mythology is Lewis and Clark. Well, guess what? They had a slave called York that Thomas Jefferson specifically violated the Northwest Ordinance for by giving allowance for them to go do the hard work of like rowing and chopping wood and stuff like that. And really, that's what this is about, right? Like it's very funny that slavery is a big issue for them, because you'll see these like questions asked by people who are new to this that say like, well, slavery's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Like how I didn't, maybe capitalism just got rid of it. It's like, no, capitalism qualitatively changed slavery into the massive global evil that birthed multiple nations.
On like a world historic level.
Absolutely.
I mean, the system of slavery becomes hyper exploitative because, and this is why understanding these systems and understanding their purpose is critical, right? I get pissed off in this Connor piece because he does something that I just find to be extremely cynical, which is cite Barbara and Karen Fields and their excellent book, which people should read, Racecraft. But he doesn't cite it in a way to like develop any argument or anything like that. It's more to just be like, oh, look, there are some people on the left who say, essentially agree with me,
Right.
right?
Well, yeah.
And it's which is just so ridiculous because what the Field Sisters do is really help us understand why these systems developed in the specific way that they did, and the reasons that these systems developed in the way that they did is that because they were appendage of capitalism, right? And you created harsher and more extractive and more cruel and more inhumane systems for the purpose of producing cash crops, like cotton and indigo and rice, right? And understanding that history is how you can immediately point to any moron out there who's saying that, like, well, wasn't capitalism a force that was fighting against slavery? And say, no, capitalism was a system that, like, help slavery evolve, right, into like an even more like disgusting and anti-human system than it had been for thousands and thousands of years before.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, that's ultimately why they have to be afraid of these conversations. And that's why Friedersdorf was never able to come back at me and say, I reject a steady progress myth. And I do think I do think it's impossible to have discussions about racial disparities without politics, or with like he. That's the game. That's the game he's coming for. That's Chris Rufo's game. That was Jordan Peterson's fundamental game too. That's why he's out about. Except he was like more fixated on, women want to be dominated, and that like the sort of gender hierarchies. But this is all just hierarchy naturalization.
Yeah. It's just you can't look at anything in the world without being able to contextualize it with politics and history.
Yep.
I'm serious. From the very earth around us, you can tell a whole history of a society based upon the rivers and the mountains and the valleys around them that dictated our life, right? And continues to this day. And so you can't sit around. I mean, obviously it'd be absurd to like get really worked up and be like, well, this mountain is like political, right? But to say that you can understand human society without understanding all the forces that dictate what we do and how we develop is absurd. So to sit around and not be able to deal with race and racism in the United States of America today, and act like you can ever separate that from the political and historical reality that created them, is just absurd. And it's the conservative game. And I like what you say is that they just try to justify current social hierarchies.
And there's a market for it for a
Yeah.
while until you start, ODing on apple cider. And I think, I think Rufo's time might be numbered. He's had a good run here, but I'd be surprised if we're talking about him as much in a year.
That'd be good.
That's optimistic, maybe. But
I'm worried, man. I'm worried that the next 5 years, 10 years of American politics are just going to be a really stupid battle between the 1619 project and like Trump's 1776 project. Because that does seem where it's going, right? Where it's like, liberals have like no grasp of the history either. And they do want to push forward this like really absurd essentialist narrative. And then they're just going to be against a equally absurd kind of American mythologizing system. This is why history is important, folks. And this is why we can't just sort of ignore these things, even though they can seem like they're just kind of like culture war fodder.
yeah.
Because this is how you get people really, really confused about the world.
Yeah, and on the bright side, when Ron DeSantis starts talking about banning Marxism, whenever they do that, make a stink about it, because if there's one way to get the kids interested in Marxism, I think making it sort of forbidden knowledge is maybe not a bad turn of events. We are going to go to the post game now. Among other things to tease, I think we will cover. I'll have David grade my. I'm
excited for this.
A 10-year-old op-ed I wrote, called, I think it's Nothing Wrong with a Hard Hat, Hammer, and Sickle, or something like that, which is talking about a Toby Keith song and how people should be communists. This is me. I wasn't identifying as a Marxism at this point, but I had read German Ideology the semester prior, and you can kind of start to see some of the influence on me. And we'll see. There's one line that really bugs me, but we'll get to that later. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Patreon.com. Oh, we'll also talk about Will Witt of Turning Point USA has a theory about a certain virus that's going on right now. They'll probably get us demonetized even if we make fun of it. So I'm gonna allude to it elliptically. But yeah, patreon.com/Left Reckoning, folks. We appreciate all of your support.